Hi, and welcome to another episode of Money Talk, where we don't just talk about money, we talk about things that can help you make more money or what to do with that money. And sometimes the very thing that we're talking about is how to get that attention. How do you get attention and how do you hold attention? How do you educate yourself in the best way possible to get that attention? It's all about making our image and making ourselves a little bit better. And today we're going to talk about what is captivating, what is interesting, and what is interesting on video. Because face it, whether you like it or not, if you want to be seen, you got to be visible. I know that sounds counterintuitive or obvious, but sometimes we think, oh, well, we don't really need to do a whole lot of our content or video or even be on screen. Well, today we're going to talk about how much easier that is and how we can reach a larger audience. So I've got two things that I want you to do right now. Before I bring on my guest, I want you to subscribe, like, and share with this, and especially forward this when you see content that you know is going to help other people. The other thing is stay tuned because we'll be right back.
Linda gave me the courage, the confidence to move forward.
And after I was finished with Linda K's training, I was at the next level.
It's Linda K. But when you trust that piece of you that says, I got something to give, I have something to say, you know you've got something to do.
Get on your feet, shake your hands in the air. Welcome to the stage, Linda K.
And we're back. And I said, we're going to have something really interesting to talk about. But what's more captivating than watching an interesting video, right? So today we have a really incredible guest. He is the head trainer and co-founder of Business Video School, a school where you get to really hone your skills on improving not only how you look, but how you shoot and what you shoot and storytelling and marketing strategies. And well, welcome to the show, Nick Niehaus. Hey, Nick.
Thanks, Linda. Yeah, excited to be here. Yeah, thanks for having me on.
I'm so excited to talk about this because, you know, we know that we need to be out and be visible to other people. There are so many metrics on the internet for, you know, did your video land and how did that look and what kinds of things that we're doing. But there are still so many people that are camera shy or feel like enough things to talk about or to do. But your business video school tells a whole different story. Talk about the school for a second.
Yeah, absolutely. So we started the school basically to help people that you're kind of nailing all the different kind of scenarios where people are struggling. And, you know, we wanted to make something that's very comprehensive. So I think that's the thing that a lot of people tell us about the school is like, I joined, I did what you told me to do. I went through your whole process and it's awesome. And I'm really happy I followed every step because video is complicated. You know, I think that this is one of those transitions we're going through as business owners. Might be one of the hardest we've ever faced. You know, it's this idea of getting comfortable and confident with an entirely new medium of communication. I think the pandemic and the Zoomification of things kind of helped people a little bit in that sense. But there's still so much to figure out, right? So that's really what the school is all about, is we try to basically eliminate as many steps as possible. So other than you needing to be the one on camera and talking into that camera, you know, our trainings and our video recipes and the AI tools we've built and the challenges that we run and the Q&A sessions we hold, they're really all meant to reduce any sort of confusion, friction, frustration, you know, people unsure how to look better or sound better on camera. All of that gets covered, right? So that, you know,
right,
happy to help on any area.
Let's unpack some of that now, Nick, because you just
sure.
get, woohoo, we got, okay, so let's zero in. The first time I saw the Business Video School, you were promoted in the real estate inner circle with one of my favorite people, Tristan Ayumada. And when I saw the concept, I was just toying around with video. I was just trying to figure out, okay, how do I hold this thing and I can't push,
Right.
you know. And so as I started doing that, taking the very first baby steps of how to set up my lights, how to set up, you know, natural light. My natural light is better than, you know, and how to clean out glare and do. And I found myself instructing my own audience on how to do, right? But I quickly hit a wall on there were so many other things, especially the multiple social media platforms. And you simply
Right.
broke it down and gave a recipe and samples of how to do a TikTok. And for me, it
Mhm.
was just, it was voice, it was lip syncing, right? And
Right.
just coming up with and I found it was, when it's fun, people want to do it. It takes the fear or anxiety out of educating yourself on how to do something. We're so
Mhm.
used to looking at TikTok or Instagram, and we see the influencers and we think, how can we have more influence? But I think it's, how do we get and just take that baby step and
Right.
find a recipe, find a simple tool to be able to use. And that's what your school has done. And I just, I really want to applaud you, because I have everybody I talk to, I say, go to this website. But how
Love that.
important
Yeah.
is the things that are changing? I mean, because, during the pandemic, people figured out, okay, if I can't see somebody, I need to be seen. And we had
Right.
time to go do things like learn how to hold the camera, learn how to set up, our virtual room, or how to do a number of those things. But when we're now back out in, and we're running busy lives, and how do we keep up
Right.
with things, especially that thing called AI?
Yeah, that's a complicated answer, right? I mean, there's so much going on, and I think I struggle with this myself. I'm on Facebook and these social platforms all the time because that's where I get a lot of my business, and I do a lot of sharing of content and whatnot. But I'm also consuming content, right? So I'm seeing all the stuff's out there, joining the different groups to try to keep an eye on what's changing with AI. Something we use pretty extensively in our business. What I will say is, I find it's really helpful to sort of have dedicated time. So one of the things that we ended up teaching on in the school is actually time management. I didn't expect that. It's something I've coached people on in the
Isn't that
past, but
interesting?
yeah, right. I mean, because you would think, all right, we're just teaching people how to make videos. That's kind of all they want. But we just kept having that question, right? Like, how do I find the time to do it? And I was like, well, let's just teach them. Why, we got a system we can sort of share with you. So I'll say that's one thing, right? Is dedicated time, and I love recurring time slots. So if you can sort of say like, all right, every Thursday at 2 o'clock for 2 hours, that's my time for this, and I'm just going to do it every single week or once a month, whatever the cadence is that makes sense. And you got to dedicate to learning. I think this is something that's, I think, changing substantially in our economy over the past,
It really is.
in particular, right? Yes, university, college, that sort of thing, it's still very valid. I think there's plenty of reason to
Yeah, but
go
it's
to
not it's
college.
not as practical as the things that you're learning
Right.
in a school like yours, because
Uh-huh.
you're learning how to implement it and apply it to your business. And that's a world of
Right.
difference. It's no longer academia. It's now, how do we practice what we're learning? How do we put it to use?
Well, right. I
And
mean, because everybody's out, but we're working full time at this point, right? Like, we don't have time to go back to school full time on top of that. So I think that's where, not just through BVS, but like if you're learning to, or if you want to learn something that you're going to apply to your business, which we should always be working on, you got to have the dedicated time for it. So I think that's a big part of this is like, yeah, maybe you went to school for something, but you should be trying to learn something new at least every single month. And with AI and with video tech, and I mean, the internet, just in general accelerated a whole bunch of these trends, and it just keeps getting faster, right? I mean, AI, like, we couldn't touch AI tools 2 years ago, and now they're everywhere, right? I mean, it's just like all of a sudden, it's just
it's
everything
like
you
the
touch has
Internet of
AI.
Things, right? So all of a
Right.
sudden, everything is AI. If you don't have AI in the title, it's like, oh, you're out of touch. You touch
Right.
on a few things on, I think that there's a misconception that, oh,
Mm.
it's, you're in real estate, Linda Kay, so that of course you have to use video. I had talked, I'm involved with a lot of masterminds, from people that are selling turf to cleaning large bin trash cans to, to speakers and coaches and real estate and agents. And it's not just, and even I never thought I'd see the day where I'm seeing CPAs, and I'm seeing more CPAs doing more content. So it isn't just one industry. It's not just one vertical. You really
Right.
got to get up with this, and you got to keep up with this.
Yeah,
The
that's a great point. It's to me, and that's just to add to that. Remember that's a form of communication now, right? Like that's what we saw with Zoom, right? People wanted to get on Zoom. We couldn't meet in person. I still do tons of Zoom meetings. There's a lot of convenience there. So I think that's the part people have to understand, right? Like we couldn't do this, right? We're doing right now if we had to be together because we're not in the same place, right? So that I think is like that's what they have to understand is that it's not a marketing tool. Yes, it can be used for marketing, but it's much broader than just marketing, right? I mean, this is just how we talk to each other. And so what I tell folks is, look, I mean, if you're not making video content of some kind, there's all kinds of versions of video. It doesn't have to be social media, it doesn't have to be ads. But if you're not communicating with people through video, you're probably doing them a disservice at this point. There's probably people in your industry who are, and they're easier to understand. It's easier to, remember what they said, right? We retain that information better. We can go back and rewatch it when we don't remember it. It's just that much more impactful. And then there's also the relationship that's forming as a result of it. We can get into brain science if we want to, but I think that's what you got to think about is just think of it as a way you talk to people now. That should make it a little bit easier to start to take action on.
you make me laugh because during the pandemic, we didn't have a choice. If we wanted to communicate, we had to communicate in some form. And most of it was on Zoom. Now, and I think there are a lot of companies, a lot of corporations that are struggling with how much office do we keep anymore because we can communicate, we can do the things that we want. And the employees don't want to go back into the office, don't want to go back into those meetings. And even things like the meetings themselves, having them structured so they're productive. How important is storytelling becoming part of this business?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's funny. Storytelling is one of these things. Here's the story I'll tell you about storytelling. So I've struggled with this for many years. I mean, I think when I first got into, I'm very introverted by nature. People sometimes don't believe me when I tell them that, but that's part of why I
That's
like video.
Nick. Come on now.
Well, I know, right? I mean, but that's why I like video because I mean, I can make a video. I'm literally alone in a room talking into a piece of plastic and glass and metal, and then all of a sudden now
practice, by the way.
Well, right. I mean, I'm not, yes, I'm not saying that like because I'm an introvert, it's easy to make video, right? I mean, there's lots of practice and kind of, trial and error that went into that. But to me, like, so anyway, back to the story part. I mean, so when I first got onto social media, it was very reluctant. I was not looking forward to it. It was kind of like, I guess I got to start building, an audience and connections because I want to grow my business. I always wanted to be an entrepreneur. So I remember at the time, I was hearing, story's always been a part of marketing, right? Telling compelling stories, the hero's journey. I studied some of the stuff in college. So I was aware of it, but right. Got to have the structure and framework and all that. And so I kept hearing people talk about like, you got to tell your story, and I'm like, I'm just a white guy from the Midwest, like I'm pretty generic in some ways. And that's not being fair to myself. There's plenty of things about me that are unique, but I think I got confused as like, I don't think I have a compelling story. I don't think I'm going to become well known just because of my background. And that was obviously, not kind of what the point was. Right. So I just kind of didn't get it. I was like, what am I supposed to talk? What does that mean to tell your story?
Right. What does it mean to tell a story?
Yeah. And so I think now what I've come to understand is I was just thinking of it way too sort of broadly. I was sort of thinking like, I got to tell this all encompassing story of my life. And, and it's like, yeah, of course, how do you do that? It's like developing a keynote. Yeah, right. It's like a speech. Yeah, right. Exactly. So I think the storytelling is really more about the structure, right? It's more about giving people information in a way that they can see themselves in the story, right? So that's, I think, what storytelling is really powerful, especially with video. And I'll tell you right now, like I always thought going into this that there would become a point where just simply talking into a camera wouldn't be interesting enough. There'd be so much of that and so many of these,
Sure.
that it would sort of die off. And it really hasn't, right? I mean, there's just so many talking head videos out there and there's so many influencers and there's so many genres where ultimately it does sort of boil down to just somebody talking to a camera. And there's just something compelling about that, right? There's something compelling about, if you think about it, like we evolved probably sitting around campfires, looking at each other from a few feet away, telling stories, right? Sometimes they're right in front of you. Sometimes you're off to your side. You see both those styles of video. And that's what it's simulating, right? It's sort of simulating that sense. So in that sense, I think storytelling is really compelling. I think it's helpful to think about, really a specific person you're talking to. That's a little counterintuitive, but it's not, you're going to tell a better story when you know something about the person you're talking to, right? So like if you know they've dealt with a particular challenge in their life, like you might steer the story away from that topic or toward that topic or whatever it might be. I think point is, if you can think about that ideal viewer, right? I mean, you're not going to know all the viewers who are watching this content, but if you think about the person you really want to attract and then basically just tell the story to that person, that always helped me, right? So a lot of times when I'm sitting down and I'm looking into a camera, that's what I'm thinking of. I'm thinking about that ideal customer. I'm almost imagining a face-to-face conversation with them. That always helps me kind of realize how to talk about those things a little better.
I always say, if you think your story is for everyone, you're speaking to no one. You really do have to choose, that perfect. Some people refer to them as an avatar, but the person that you're really trying to reach, the person that you feel that they hear the story, that they have the same problem. And it's a really simple formula. What problem do you solve? And who are those people? What kind of problems do they have? And how do you solve that problem? What's the result of working with you? And I think that we tend to, as storytellers, overcomplicate this, because if it looks like it's going to be too difficult to do, they won't see themselves being able to see the solution, right? So what tips would you give the storyteller as they're starting to tell in short form or long form, and explain what those are?
Yeah, I mean, so there's all kinds of aspects to that you can consider. I think one of the things, so I like to start simple, right? So simple story structure, always have a hook, right? So I think that part of it is about what is the punchline, what's the climax of the story, what's the point, right? I like to tease that or even just directly address it at the beginning of the video, right? So a lot of my stuff is more kind of advice based, or telling people case studies of things that I've tried, because we do a lot of experimentation with our marketing and whatnot. And so I'll always start with like a bold statement or a question at the beginning that summarizes what the video is about, right? So what I'm getting at there is like, this is where I got confused when I first started thinking about stories. I thought it had to be like, this sort of epic tale every time, which never made any sense to me. That's obviously not the point. So in this case, it's more about just what parts of the story structure are important, right? So in a good story, you've obviously got, sort of there's action that builds up to a climax, and then there's usually sort of the back half or back end of it, where you sort of, let people have a nice outro, so to speak, and wrap things up at the end. Just think about which parts of that you need in each video, right? So the first part is the hook. You got to have the sort of initial thing you're trying to grab their attention with. So a question, a statement. I also think a prop can be helpful there. Then you tell
Nick?
Go ahead.
Give an example.
Yeah. So like back to what I talk on, right? So, you might say something like, let's say I'm going to talk about an AI tool that I'm using in a little case study story that I'm telling, right? So it's like, for example, I've got this AI tool I built. It's a neighborhood matchmaker that helps people find their ideal neighborhood based on the amenities in the area that they're looking for, right? So if I want to talk about that, I might want to tell, the case study of how I commented on somebody's post, and then a whole bunch of other people responded to that comment asking for their own copy of this tool. And so I got like 40 leads off a single comment, which was really exciting, right? So in that case, I'd say like, have you ever gotten leads for your business just by commenting on someone else's post, right? Now, what that does is that question is going to basically immediately filter all the people who are watching the video. Obviously, most people only see
self-select, doesn't it?
Exactly. Right. So you get that the first couple seconds, most people see that, right? That's where they kind of make that decision of, am I going to watch more or not? And so what you want to have happen is you want the people who don't care at all. Maybe they're not business owners. Maybe they don't care about lead gen. You want them to keep scrolling, right? Well, this isn't for me. And they move on. And then the people who are interested, you want them to stick around. What that does is it tells the algorithm, okay, hey, these people that watch this, these are the kinds of people that this video is meant for. These are the kinds of people that are going to appreciate this content. And then it will actually go out and it'll show your video to more of those kinds of people, right? So I think so the hook is so important. I mean, it's by far the most important part of a video. at least on social. I don't necessarily think that's true on every single location or platform, but on social, because of the nature, because of the scroll, you got to have a good hook, right? So I think the hook is that's probably the most important part. The next part then is the body. This is the story part. And that's where I think you often want to help people understand the problem first, right? So I usually kind of define the problem. So I'll talk about, I made this, well, maybe the problem in that case is I want to get more business for my company, right? That's a very identifiable problem. Everybody's been there, right? So I'm
And
looking for new
who
ways to,
doesn't want
yeah,
more clients, right?
you would
Right?
think, yeah. I mean, yeah, I guess there's some folks that don't, right? But that's pretty rare. So yeah, you want to give people like here's the problem I was having is I'm having trouble. So again, story structure, right? So like the other day I was trying to find a new way to get in front of some of the right people, and I just wasn't able. I was having trouble getting the attention of my ideal customer. So I sat down and I thought it through again. Really tried to ask myself like, what is something that person is struggling with, right? What are some of the challenges they're facing? What are they having problems with? And I realized, for real estate, that's probably figuring out where they're going to live next if they're thinking about moving, right? So you kind of set up that problem, explain that a little bit, and then you sort of tell the story of how you solve the problem. Now, I will tell you this: if you're trying to appeal to your ideal customer, and you can't do this in every case, but that hero's journey structure, the idea of there's a person and they're confronting a challenge and they're trying to overcome that challenge. A lot of times we tell the story as if we're the hero, right? So I took on this challenge, I did this thing. That's fine. But if you're trying to attract customers, you want them to be the hero, right? So again, this doesn't
Oh,
apply
no,
to all
say that
videos.
again because this is so
Yeah.
important. That is really key, Nick. Say it again.
So you want, the client needs to be the hero of the story, right? So you as the business owner, you take the role of the guide, right? So kind of the trying to think of like famous examples, like King Arthur and Merlin, right? You got the wizard, that's the guide. He's the person who's doing the training. He's the person providing the support, right? A lot of times that's the person who has the wisdom or the knowledge that they're sharing with the hero, but the hero is the one that's taking the action, right? So in my example, it's not exactly applicable, but I could talk about how I made this thing for a customer because the customer was trying to do this thing, and then they went out and they promoted the tool really well, and they did all the things they were supposed to do that I taught them, because again, I'm the one with the knowledge, and then then you get to the climax of the story, right? And the climax is, so knowing what I taught them, they went out, and here's what they did. They saw an opportunity. Somebody said, hey, I'm struggling. I'm really thinking about moving, but I just don't know where to move. Where do you think I should head to next? And everybody was commenting with, you should move this area, you should move that area. Well, I came in and said, hey, how about better than that? I made a cool little AI tool that'll help you make that decision. Do you want the link? And then all of a sudden, all these other people wanted it too. We got 40 people. We got all these conversations started. It was amazing. And then, and then that's the climax, right? And then you kind of take the story and wrap it up. Which is, that end part is not as important. I think with most videos, the end part you want to think about is, bring the story down for a landing, right? They took the leads, they worked them, and it ended up turning into X amount of business, blah, blah, blah. Then it's the call to action, right? So this is another part that a lot of people mess up, but you got to have that call to action at the end. And I always tell people, make sure you think a lot about the style of video that you're putting out there, right? Because a lot of times at the end of every video, a lot of especially real estate folks will say, hey, if you're thinking about buying or selling, hit me up. That's okay, but that's not always the right context, right? So you want to make sure you think
it is
about
definitely
what
not.
the video was, right?
It's
And if you don't,
repellent, Nick.
well, sure. I mean, you get to the end, like, okay, you're rolling your eyes, you hear the same thing, right?
Right.
So I always say, look, make sure the call to action is associated with whatever the content was about, right? So if you told a story, maybe you want people to tag a friend who needs to hear that message, right? Or maybe you want them to follow your account or share the video. But just make sure that it's attached to what the actual content was.
That is the most amazing formula. Thank you for sharing that. The thing that comes to mind is, can the viewer see themselves in that journey? That's the most important piece. And what you said, and I can't under or overemphasize it enough, that we are not the hero. We are the person with the knowledge that's leading them, because they are the hero. And if they don't see themselves as the hero, they won't want to do it. It looks tough.
Right.
when you're doing social media posts like this, how important are hashtags?
Well, hashtags I think are becoming less important than they used to be. There are certain platforms where they're still useful, in particular like Instagram, possibly TikTok. But the reality is like these platforms have just gotten so smart, right? So they're able to scan a lot of like at this point a lot of them can actually scan like what you're saying in the videos. That's relatively new, right? Because they auto generate your captions, and so therefore they have the text. The description obviously can have keywords in it, so you might want to add hashtags, especially on something like Instagram. TikTok is probably not a bad idea still, but they're really not necessary in a lot of cases anymore. I think, but what is necessary is just making sure that you're talking to the right people. And look, I mean, it's interesting. SEO, right? Search engine optimization or search engine marketing, however you want to call it. It's been around for a long time. There's always been all these hacks, right? So things like hashtags, having the right description, all that kind of stuff kind of come from that world, right? This place where it was about, sort of tricking the system into making sure it shows your stuff. Well, most people in that space now will say, look, the most important thing to do when it comes to ranking on the search engines is provide useful, valuable content. So if somebody does a search and your article or video or whatever it is pops up and they spend a few minutes consuming that content, that they're getting the information they were looking for, right? Like these platforms are smart enough now that they're able to sort of determine that particular thing without all the hacks being necessary, right? So hashtags, probably not a bad idea, but what I often find is they just get caught up on these things in a way that's not useful, right? So I got to make sure I get just the right hashtag. And I'm going, yeah, but is the video any good? Like, are you actually answering the question people are asking? I mean, if you
Right.
hack it and they find your video and it sucks, they're just
And it's
they're gonna
like,
dislike
oh my
you,
God.
right? Like, just be mad at you, right? So I think
Right.
that's more important. But yeah, I think in a couple cases, basically just sort of categorizing. That's what hashtags are, right? You're basically putting your video into categories, and that will help them find it. So in places like Instagram where hashtags are certainly, you can even follow hashtags and whatnot. In those cases, probably not a bad idea to have just a few, not too many. 3 to 5 is probably not a bad idea.
Not a bad idea. So, okay, descriptions and how important
Mhm.
is what your content being described in keywords so things get found in a keyword search. Talk about that for a second.
Yeah, so it's similar to hashtags. I think the keyword stuff it can be helpful, right? I mean, obviously these platforms are search based, right? So TikTok is actually where a lot of like Gen Z is starting their searches now. They're not even going to Google anymore. So that's kind of an interesting trend
That's
that's
an
shifting.
interesting trend.
Yeah, so I do think, thinking about it so the way to think about that, right, is what are the questions that people ask that my content could help, right? So that's really that's the description. That's the words you want to use in the description. So if somebody were to say, like for instance, back to my example, just because I was already talking about it, if somebody's like, I want new ways to generate leads. Like, what's a question they'd ask, right? Like, what newest ways to generate leads, right? Or creative
Right.
lead generation strategies, or things like that, right?
Need more leads,
That would
right?
be, yeah, get more, right? Grow my business, right? Things like that. So you can't use all of them, right? So, and again, this is where you could spend a lot of time thinking about this. Just a little bit of time is probably fine. So just think, what are maybe the most obvious couple questions people ask, and then just see if you can sort of work that into your description, right? In fact, again, a lot of times I will still also ask questions there. So just like the hook, right? The hook was, have you ever gotten a bunch of leads off a comment? I might ask maybe not that question. That's a hook that's a little different than the description. The description is more of an SEO thing, right? So I might say there, like, are you looking for creative ways to grow your business, or are you trying to get more leads, right? Like those are again things people might
Right.
search.
You're
So
focusing
that
on
I
the
do think
problem.
helps.
Right. And
Yeah,
thinking about what your viewers are looking for. What do they want? And serving up what they
exactly.
want.
Yep.
So let's shift the conversation just a little bit, Nick. Um,
Hmm.
and we're now more acclimated to shooting video. And now we start thinking about the cost of a virtual assistant or going to a third party to edit. And the AI tools have made it so much easier to be able to produce content. And I think that there's a misconception And then a trend, going back to the misconception. The misconception is it has to be perfect. It has to be a great video. It has to be really well edited. It's got to have sound. It's got to have lights. It's got to have story. There's a lot of things and then all of a sudden, tools made it really easy for us to just focus on the content itself. Talk to us about a few of those.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot. And I will say, some of them are easier to learn how to use than others, and I think so. Here's what I'll say. I'm going to give you some tools, but before I do that, I do want to mention work on learning them one step at a time, right? So I know, because I've just seen so many people fall in that trap, right? I got this new tool. I'm going to learn to do everything the tool can do, and then I'm going to make an amazing video. And that's not even a good way to practice making a good video, right? I mean, the best way to do that is just to make a bunch of not very good videos and learn as you go. And that's kind of how our brains work. So yeah. So that being said, I think the de facto standard at this point is CapCut, so CAPCUT. It's owned by ByteDance, which is the company that owns TikTok. So it's basically the TikTok editing app. Now, if you don't like ByteDance and you don't want to touch that, I'll give you some alternatives. But I mean, this is, I mean, it's the gold standard, I think, at this point. I mean, it allows so much different editing. You can generate things with AI. We're talking, scripts, we're talking graphics, you can do some of the editing with AI. Again, these are all different features you have to learn. So don't think you're going to do all those on your very first video, but it also has some basic stuff like a teleprompter, right? So in terms of making your first video, if you want to have a short script, you throw it in the teleprompter, you read it back into the camera, and you're pretty much done, right? So CapCut, definitely one to check out. Couple other ones that I'm excited about. A good editor that's online based. So if you like the idea of a cloud-based editor where you can access the files on any device and it's going to actually keep it up to date as to whatever you edited on the previous device.
I like that. I'm listening.
Yeah, that's a good one, right? So that's Kapwing, CAPWING. CapCut has some of those features, but I'm giving you some alternatives at this point, right? So Kapwing. Yeah, so KAPWING. I know it's kind of a weird one. Look up why they're named Kapwing if you're curious. It's an interesting story. So Kapwing is one, and then a couple others that I like that I think are just a little different. I'll tell you, are Opus. So OPUS, Opus. That is very specifically a tool. And we're still kind of experimenting with it, but I think it works pretty well. It is an AI tool. And what it does is it actually takes long form content and it will split it up into short form content for you. It'll actually even cut it out. It'll edit it down.
Hang on a second, Nick. Explain what long form and short form is for our viewers.
Yeah. So this is long form content we're doing right now, right? It's something that's, more than a few minutes long. A lot of times it's not really scripted, or, maybe it is a YouTube video that's scripted, but it probably has sort of different portions as you go. So yeah, long form, it's probably,
it could be anything that somebody was teaching, or it could have been a master class piece. All right. Long form.
Yes.
And then there were brilliant things inside of it. There were brilliant things in it, but not the whole thing is brilliant, right? There's a lot of filler and fluff. So now we want to take the smaller pieces, which we would typically do in an edit, but this tool that you're going to tell us about does it for us.
So that's what Opus does, because it'll just take the long form and it'll basically say, which parts of this are the most interesting, right? And then it kind of cuts them out and makes them into their own videos. So that's really cool. I mean, that's obviously, if you have that kind of content, that's pretty useful. But I will say, I mean, I do think, especially for newbies, somewhat ironically, sometimes that's the easiest kind of content to get yourself to make and just do and be done with, is to just either go live and just talk on a topic for a while, right? And then it's done. You throw it in Opus, it cuts out the parts that are best, or do an interview with somebody. I mean, that's in a lot of ways kind of how I got started with videos. I interviewed probably about 100 different people on over a couple of years. And, I wasn't great at it at first, and I got better over time, but that would, again, you can usually create 10, 15 video clips out of a half hour or 45-minute interview.
Totally.
And it's a great way to meet people, right? You can ask whoever you want to come on your show and get to know them and build relationships, so that's a good one. The last one I'll mention. Yeah. And so the last one I'll mention is called Descript. Not to give you too many, but they all do sort of different things. So DE script. that is going to be a tool for one of the things it does that's really interesting is it'll allow you to edit your videos based on the transcript. So you can actually just go through and say, okay, where I said, cut that out, right? You know, where I had that little stumble over those words and then repeated myself, cut that out. And so that makes it a lot easier. One of the things I always tell people is, look, when you're recording a video, depending on what it is, right? But if you make a mistake, don't restart, just go back to the beginning of that sentence and then keep going, right? And then you can just go back and cut out those parts where you made those little stumbles. So a tool like Descript makes that much easier because you're just looking at the words, you're finding them, and you're deleting them.
That's awesome. That's really a cool tool because I think when we start talking, especially when I first started this, there was a lot of cut.
Right. Sure, I get
eye
it.
rolling and the torture of But if you're listening, just remember it's practice. The first time I sat down to play the piano, I sucked. I play pretty well, and it's given me a great life. But I didn't start out being great. So you just got to remember to be a little patient with yourself and just go back and keep practicing it. You'll say, oh, the content was great. And then you look at it and maybe the lighting wasn't. So you have all kinds of tools for you to be able to do it. Answer me one question. Why do we always think we suck when we look at our own videos?
Yeah, there's a lot of sort of psychology or neuroscience behind that, actually. First and foremost, there's just literally two quick things. Number one is your face is flipped, right? So when you look at yourself in the mirror, that image is a mirror image, right? So that means it's literally rotated by 180 degrees or flipped around, whatever. It's flipped around, right? You get what I'm saying? That doesn't happen on video. So that's one thing it's kind of weird, but we think our faces are pretty symmetrical, but they're not technically, right? So like one eye is slightly higher, that kind of stuff, right? So when we see a video, we see ourselves the way everybody else does. So that's the important part to understand. We are the only people that see ourselves in the mirror every day. So the image that we have in our heads of how we look is actually flipped and is therefore slightly disorienting when you see it on camera, right? So that's number one. Yeah, so that I think, that's the first thing to remember. The second thing is your voice. Again, we hear our voices as deeper in our own heads because they vibrate the bones in our head, and it kind of creates like an additional lower octave that we hear that nobody else does, right? So that's why we think our voice sounds weird. So the first thing you got to do is just remember those two things and remember that no one else sees me or hears me the way I do, right? So whatever you're seeing on camera, that's what people are used to. That's what they expect. That's completely normal. So that's first and foremost. That the more practice you get, the more times you watch your own content, the less bothered you'll be by all of that, right? Like I don't feel like I see my stuff. I still don't always like watching my own videos, but it's not because I don't like seeing myself. It's more about what I was talking about or something else, right? So that's one thing. Keep those in mind. Then the other is a lot of times it's your lighting. If you don't like your audio, you can do things with your microphones and whatnot. But a lot of what makes somebody feel like they don't look good on camera is just that the light is shining from the wrong direction. So if you think about, I always point at people to the idea of you're sitting around a campfire and you're telling scary stories and you got the flashlight under your chin, right? So you're shining the light up and it makes you look scary, right? It's pretty intimidating. Well, that is basically the same thing you get when you're in any room in your house or office, except the lights are shining from above instead of below, right? So we can see how grotesque it looks when we shine the light from below. But we don't see it as much when we shine the light from above because we're just used to seeing each other like that. So what that does is it'll create any sort of crease, pimple, zit, whatever's on your face, it will create a shadow, right? Because the light is shining across your face.
Oh, well, I know.
Right? Well, we all know. Yeah, I think we've all probably been in that boat at one point, right? So instead, you just got to make sure the light's in front of you. That's it, right? So you could buy nicer lights, all that kind of stuff, but that's usually not even necessary. A lot of times, if you simply turn off the overhead lights in the room and you turn to face a window, so you're just getting some sort of ambient natural light in, all of a sudden, all those things, all those creases will not be as obvious, right? And so for a lot of people, it literally makes them look 10 years younger, like immediately.
Well,
And
and
that
the
can be kind of
cameras can
shocking.
help
Yeah.
too, Nick. So, you could have
Uh-huh.
self-correction or optimization or things like that. It's a little
Oh,
tricks of the
sure.
trade. But you've got a couple of lights around you. Talk about what you've got
Mhm.
in front of you and behind you, and then at your angles, so people
Yeah.
understand what great lighting looks like.
hmm Yeah, so I'm using right now what you might call like a 2-point light setup or 2.5, I guess you could say. So I've got one big light right here. It's right off to the side of the camera. It's called a softbox light. It's kind of like this particular version is not that expensive, but it's sort of like a professional light, right? So it's big. It's about 2.5 feet wide. Got a big heavy stand underneath it. That's probably overkill for most people. Obviously, I run a school, teaches people how to make videos, so we got to have this stuff at a certain level. But that's right next to the camera. That's what's called the key light. It's the primary light. It provides most of the light in your shot. Then over here, really up above me, kind of, it's right outside the camera shot. So if I were to kind of reach over here, I could touch it. That is what we would call a hair light. And so what that does is actually shines light kind of on the back of my head a little bit, right? So even as I kind of do that, you can see some of that light shining on the back of my hair. What that does is it helps create some separation, does some definition, right? Like the back of my head and my shoulders are just a little bit more clear. And that creates separation between you and the background behind you. The third light I have right now is just an accent light. So that's a colored light that shines on the wall behind me. What's kind of cool about that one is I can actually set it to any color I want, the full rainbow spectrum, so to speak. So right now it's pretty neutral. It's sort of a blue color. It's just meant to make the background look a little bit more interesting. But when I turn it to red, that totally changes the feeling of the video, right? That's obviously much more intense and almost kind of hellish looking, almost like a fire. But yeah, you can use all the colors you
Scary.
want, right? Yeah, so that's kind of fun. Not necessary at all. I do think the key light, that's the one you really want to focus on having. But I will say, I mean, having something behind you like that does add an element that allows for flexibility, right? So one thing I always point out is if I want, I can change the color, or I can even change where the light is shining. And the next time somebody sees a video from me, the video automatically looks different. And that's one way to kind of catch their attention, right? So but that's kind of higher level, not necessary, right?
So, question: virtual background or not?
Yeah, I both work. I'm not going to tell you one's necessarily better than the other. I like natural backgrounds just because I can sit down, I can hit record, and I can get up and go. Right? I mean, I don't have to worry about that. Nowadays, though, a lot of these tools, they actually have a tool that will remove the background in your video even without green screen, right? Just like Zoom does, right? So you can put a virtual background. You don't necessarily have to have a green screen back there. They're not perfect, right? You usually get a little bit of kind of pixelation around your body and whatnot.
Right.
But they work well enough that I could, after the fact, kind of go back and say, actually, I do want to swap something else in. What I always say on the background, though, is it's really a question of what the video is. Like a lot of what I do is training, and I often have slides, and so I like to have a clean background because I don't want to distract people from the slides they're supposed to be looking at,
Right.
right? Now, if I was going to make a social video, though, a lot of times then I will use virtual backgrounds because I want to put something back there that's more eye-catching, right? So that's really what that's
Dinosaur
about. Is
running, near your head. That.
right, just bright colors, just stuff that people go like, "What is that?" Like even just that kind of thing.
Right.
Even literally intentionally putting like strange things that have nothing to do with the video behind you. And I'll tell you, like, I have some friends that are successful influencers that they use all these little hacks and tricks, and they like mispronounce words on purpose to get people to comment on the video and correct them. And I think that stuff is kind of silly, but it works, right? So
Yeah,
just it
whatever
is worth
works.
thinking about. But yeah, just point is keep it clean, make it easy to watch your content, right? I think that's the main point.
That's right. Just keep doing it and have fun at it. So,
Yeah,
something personal. I think I heard that you just became a new dad.
I did. Yeah, about 4.5 months ago.
Congratulations. Oh my
Thank
God,
you.
how exciting, how exciting. Is the household the same?
Well, certainly not, right? I mean, it's we got quite a bit of craziness going on with the baby around now. So we have a 2.5-year-old dog, so she's kind of not a puppy, but still kind of acts like one. And so it's been crazy. It's been a lot of hecticness. But Sophia, that's my daughter's name. she's great. I mean, she's been surprisingly easy. We've had some things we had to deal with, like she had to wear a harness for a couple months because she had some hip dysplasia problems. But
Mm.
otherwise, like sleeping through the night from a very early stage. I think we were like
Wow,
4 weeks
you're
in,
very
she was already
fortunate. Oh my
kind of
goodness.
sleeping through the night. Yeah, so we've gotten really lucky, and she's a really happy baby, smiles all the time. So
Oh,
it's been a
that's
lot of
so
fun, but we're still figuring it out. Yeah, we're potentially bringing a nanny on for a couple days a week to kind of help us out. My wife and I both work together, so we work from
oh,
home, which is great. We get to spend all day with the baby. But then it's also kind of, it's almost like the football, kind of passing her off every couple hours as we try to get enough work done. So we're
oh,
figuring it
you'll
out though.
figure it out. You'll figure it out. Before we close the show, what would you say to our folks about where we're moving towards in a trend? So we've been using AI tools. Is there an expectation that we're going to have to get better at our edits or get better at our videos?
Hmm. Yeah, I think so. I mean, I do think that's where, a couple years ago, I was sort of telling people like, you just got to get started. You just need to start making video. I mean, that's where we were at then. Enough of them have at this point that like, I'm starting to switch to like, look, you got to make better videos. You got to make better content. I mean, for one, the AI editing makes it easier, but like we're at a point now where you can basically generate people from scratch using AI, right? So not only are you competing with your actual real human counterparts that you're competing against, but you're probably also going to be very shortly here, if not already, competing with AI versions of people too, right? So I think
That's
absolutely.
scary.
I mean, well, right. I mean, it is scary, and it's also like they're going to be very efficient because they click a couple buttons and boom, a video is done.
Right.
So yeah, I think it's so what you want to think about is, yeah, the quality is starting to matter more. I think and everybody always seems to focus on editing as the aspect of quality, and that is part of it, but it's everything, right? I mean, it's your on camera presence, right? I mean, just being confident, being somebody who can make that eye contact with the lens and not look uncomfortable. It's what you're saying, right? Making sure the structure's there. We talked about the story structure, right? Having good hooks at the beginning, like all that stuff goes into the quality. And so I think, yeah, I do think we're going to see a trend where we're going to hear more people recommending less is more. And I'm not saying we're necessarily there yet, but I feel that I think about it a little bit more that way now. It's like I'd rather make less frequent videos, but make them a little bit
Make
better.
better ones. Mhm.
And I think we're going to see kind of that trend. So I could see people, especially with these short form tools, basically focus on, I'm going to make one really good piece of long form content every so often, and then it's going to get cut up into all these clips. So there's lots of short pieces to put out. That way you can dedicate a little more time to that primary piece. I could see that being a trend that we kind of move toward in the future.
I think that's an important point too, Nick, because we're at an all-time low for trust. Yeah, I mean,
Oh, right.
trust is in the single digits, and so we're also competing for attention. We're compared to the attention. We're in an attention deficit culture, and our attention is described as that of a goldfish, which is roughly about 7 seconds. People are popping off, so we really do need to get very good at capturing their attention, even for the 10 seconds that we get them. So,
Yeah,
and if
that's
you're
crazy.
really lost for an idea, if you're lost for how to do any of this, the Business Video School is where you want to go, because these are easily consumable pieces that will teach you in the easiest form that you can possibly imagine. So I know that you want to let people know what they can do and how they can find you and how they can get, talk to me about a test it, try it, and you'll like it offer.
Yeah, so I'm actually just typing this in the comments real quick. It's probably the easiest way to share it. But basically, yeah, if you want to send us a text message, it's probably the easiest way to get signed up. We offer a free trial that also incorporates a discount on memberships, kind of get the best of both worlds. But we
Yeah.
don't do it on a rolling basis, right? So, and it's relatively new. We're kind of still dialing it in, but point is, it will be available again here shortly. I think we're planning on opening it here in the next couple weeks. So I put that in the comments. Hopefully you're seeing that on your end. But if you want to pre-register for that free trial, you're not committing to anything by texting us. You're just making sure you're going to have the right information. You just want to, there you go, text the word trial to 314-274-6649. And just to be clear, only the word trial, right? So you type in the phone number, you type out the word trial and hit enter. Don't include your name. Don't include any other details. Don't, whatever. Don't include the quotes, right? Because it is an automated system and it's only going to understand what you want if you say just the word trial, right? And once you do that, it's probably going to ask you for your name. I think it asks for your birthday just for compliance. And then it'll say, okay, great, you're registered. And then what'll happen is sometime in the next couple of weeks, when we do open the trial again, you'll be the first to get an invitation to join it. So if you'd like to check us out, that's the way to do it. Otherwise, if you just want to look into us in general, just Google Business Video School. We're all over the place. You can check out our website, our reviews on Google, all that good stuff. It's probably the best way to do it.
Nick, thank you so much for joining us today. And
of course,
I can tell you that this is going to be watched over and over and over again. So thank you so much. Really, thank you.
Of course. Thank you so much, Linda. It was a lot of fun.
And if you have even an idea that you want to try this, if you haven't done it, or you want to get better at your own skill, go to his business video school. You will not regret it. Thank you again for joining us today. It was fun having you here, and I'll see you next time. Do you like to talk about money? If you do, and you'd like to be a guest, contact me at lindak360.com.